Imagine if you have your vision as the car with the right team. Imagine how quick that vision will come into the footsteps. Something that was taking 5 years takes 3 months.
This morning is all about leadership and influence.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. Carl Hendricks here from the Inside Show. We have so many people on the set here today on a very interesting, rather sticky subject in South Africa. You'll see it worldwide, all different conversations around the war, and you look at war within the land of the land or country. You look at the Gaza Strip. It's about land. You look at Ukraine, it's about land. You look at the green land. You know now Donald Trump wants the green land as well. Everything is about land. And this morning, a subject entitled, We Are Not Coloureds. We are the owners of the land in South Africa. This is the first of many conversations. This is going to be a free flow. We're going to go just in dialogue. We're going to debate. We're going to talk. We've got 5 gentlemen in this studio here today that will discuss this issue. Thank you so much. We would love you, please, just to have any form of remarks. We will look at it. If there's any questions, please post it. We will, at some point, halfway through this whole broadcast, halfway through, we will then just look at all the specifics and then we will give some answers. Well, not to waste any time, we've got fine people here this morning, and then we're going to start from one point, just introducing everybody around the set, who they are, what they represent. And it's best for them just to state themselves, not better than you telling the nation who you are. Thank you so much. We'll start right from the corner.
My name is Jaki Seroke. I'm a member of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, and have been such for almost 55 years now. I'm currently the treasurer in the NEC of the PAC. And I have been a spokesperson for the PAC for as long as I can remember. That's it about myself. I've also been to forums like CODESA during the period when there were negotiations in the country. And I've also dabbled in other things outside the PAC. I write books. I've written a memoir, the story of my life, and I also have written poetry. I'm into fiction. Thank you.
Great.
Larry Varrie Jr. is the name. I am the managing director of Color Day, and we are strongly advocating for the rights of indigenous people, and also bringing an understanding in the concept or the racial classification of the colored identity and what it means for our people as a whole, and what it is robbing us of. So I'm happy that we have this platform today to be able to discuss that very subject. This is not a seminar, this is not an engagement, this is reckoning with history, with power, and understanding where we come from, where we are, and where we are going, and whose land this truly is, and what the way forward is in order to make sure that everybody's voices are heard in South Africa. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Zolani Mkiva. I'm the General Secretary of the Congress of Traditional Leaders of South Africa, abbreviated as CONTRALESA. Well, we went to war to defend the land, and that's the origins of the struggle for liberations. We were fighting to defend our land, but we then went into a struggle for the restoration of the land to the African majority, because the land belongs to the Africans. Africa is for Africans. And we stand by that, we still stand by that, we're still fighting for that, even in the new dispensation. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Busiso Xaba. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development. Firstly, let me apologize that he could not make it here himself. Those who saw the posters saw that he should have been sitting in this chair. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Larry Varrie.
I am the national leader of GECSA. GECSA stands for the Greater Aboriginal Community Council of Southern Africa. I am also the paramount chief of the movement. We are here to talk about the one conversation that is being avoided and very strategically avoided by those who are now the neo-colonial rulers of the country in the form of the ANC and the DA. We have a lot of questions regarding how the ANC that was hailed as the liberators of the people had a 75% majority and failed on the most critical issue, which is land. We question whether there is no partnership between, maybe not the ANC as a whole, members in the ANC, and those who negotiated with them and opened the door for negotiations. It seems as if there were negotiations behind the negotiations. And that might be the reason why the land remained a sticky issue. We believe that the ANC has ensured that those who committed the atrocities against the Aboriginal people and the African people as a whole has used or attempted to use the Constitution to justify the crimes of and the atrocities of colonization and apartheid.
Just on that one point, I just want Varrie Jr. just to explain a little about what is the Aboriginal title and how does that translate into the context of South Africa specifically. Just for the listeners, just to get a platform as introduction exactly.
Yeah, I think what is important to establish this conversation on is the Richtersveld Case, which there was a ruling, a verdict that was handed down by the Constitutional Court in 2003, which acknowledged, was a unanimous decision by all the judges in the Constitutional Court, that Aboriginal title exists in South Africa, that the indigenous people, the first indigenous people, survived, their rights have survived colonial annexation. That right has survived post-apartheid, pre-apartheid and post-apartheid laws. And that those laws, that right, Aboriginal title, it supersedes the colonial European frameworks of the law. The court has acknowledged that. The Constitutional Court, it also went further and it said that right, that Aboriginal title, predates the existence or the formation of the South African state itself. That right also predates the Constitution itself. And therefore, the Constitutional Court also affirmed, therefore, that right is equal to, if not superior to, the Constitution and any other law that was formed or written by white hands. So that is Aboriginal title. It's the title, what in modern South Africa what we call a title deed to a property. It's that title deed, the Aboriginal title deed, that the Aboriginal people hold in South Africa.
Now, based on the Richtersveld, I just wanted to know that one court case specifically. Do you want that to go as a general rule right through South Africa?
Well, I think it's important to understand why that principle wasn't broadly applied in South Africa. Why government never enforced or applied that principle. Because if the Constitutional Court handed down that verdict, it means it became part of South African law. It is an unavoidable conversation. And the only question would be why they've never implemented it. What is the reason behind it? And I actually think this is, in terms of the negotiations that should take place, the people that are even here today, is we should be able to now open the discussion to say, right, if the Constitutional Court of South Africa has acknowledged this right, that the Aboriginal people hold, or that the South African Constitution acknowledges Aboriginal title, then it means that possibly between ourselves, between the Aboriginal people and the other indigenous people in South Africa, then we can negotiate. Do we need the state is another question. Do we need the state to negotiate when it comes to the land? Can we, between ourselves, including the Afrikaner community, have a discussion or negotiation without state interference? So those kinds of avenues is what this court ruling has opened South Africa for. I don't know why this thing was never explored further, because it is more than 20 years later. It's 2003 that verdict was handed down. So I think it's important to discuss and hear what the different views are.
Yeah, let's just open the land issue now, much broader, for everybody just to participate for a while here. Prince, yourself, you guys fought for land. Now, on the one hand, blood flowed on the other side. On the other hand, blood flowed on the other side. How should we go around land? It's so sticky, it's sensitive, very, very sensitive. What's your views around that?
Well, my starting point is that, let me take a cue from what Larry Varrie Jr. says. The Aborigines of this country are equally the indigenous people of this country. And the indigenous people of Africa are equally the Aborigines of this continent. We need to settle that, because if we speak now about the borders that were created by coloniality, we're going to lose this discussion. We sit around the table, we're all Africans, we're all natives, we're all aboriginal to this continent, we're all indigenous to this continent. So the main important thing is for us to unite so that we can restore the land back to ourselves as a people. And he's correct. The instrument today that we call the Republic of South Africa is a creation of coloniality. It was created by colonialists to control land primarily, and secondary to control us as a people, so that forever we can be subjected to people of European origin. So we as CONTRALESA have taken a view that for the last 30 years, the South African state, the post-colonial state, as we know it now, the democratic state, has actually failed to deal with the land question, which is a political question, to restore the land to its rightful owners. I stand here representing traditional leadership, and we claim, rightfully so, that the custodianship over the land of this country rests with traditional leaders across the spectrum, including the Khoi and San people. The Khoi and San communities are amongst the first victims of coloniality, and they have even lost the evidence that is based on their own heritage to point at some important landmarks. But we know and we acknowledge, and that's why we are fighting for their rights as we are fighting for our rights. Because their rights are our rights. Our rights, they are their rights. Including the issue of them being recognized insofar as traditional leadership is concerned. So that is what we stand for as CONTRALESA. Right now, we are busy developing a document which is going to be addressed to the three arms of the state, wherein we are calling for the referendum on the land question, because it can no longer be outsourced to parliamentarians who have failed for 30 years. 30 years is too much, that we have not seen a great progress and a shift in terms of the land ownership in the country. And we don't like this confusion that says the land of this country belongs to everybody from everywhere in the world. The land here belongs to the Africans.
Yeah, we know the PAC is for very, very long on this land issue. Most probably just a view from your side.
Yes. I also want to take the cue from the Richtersveld ruling. You know, for a long time, there's been a myth and falsehood that's propagated on in Southern Africa that the Europeans found an empty land. And we all know that it can't be true. But this argument, you find it in the propaganda, in the history books, and almost everywhere. It's also used as a political argument to say that no one has the exclusive right to ownership as Aboriginal people or as indigenous people to the land. But we know that the falsehood is incorrect because there is overwhelming evidence that has shown that people lived in this part of the world, in Southern Africa. And those people who lived here are the origins of mankind, of humankind, because they go back through a very long history. And institutions such as the Cradle of Humankind in this area testifies to that. So the argument of an empty land should no longer be the case. We can't be talking along those terms. And I think it is one of the points to start correcting the issue around who has a right to the legal power as indigenous people to drive the building of a new nation. You can never build a nation if you deny the indigenous people, the Aboriginal people, their right to a stake in the asset that is their land. I think the political debate has done us an injustice without delving in this issue that the courts have ruled on. And I know that the constitution that was, the current constitution of South Africa, does dabble into the right to self-determination of the people of this land. And they say that as various peoples. But if you look at the way in which South Africa is established through the prism of racism, the prism of ethnicity, and the prism of tribalism, they've tried to divide people so that they can conquer. So that whole concept of divide and rule, from an Africanist point of view, is something that we believe should be defeated. Our people must unite on the basis of being the true and legal owners of Africa. It is not an exclusivist approach. If you are indigenous people, even if you belong to a particular grouping that occupies a space, a geographic space in countries, people from outside can come in and live there and even own the title of being Zulu if they live in Zululand. Without necessarily, Zulu doesn't necessarily mean you must be indigenous. You know, you can come in and live with the people, settle peacefully with them in a correct manner. But here in South Africa, we have a problem of colonialism, of settler colonialism. And the problem starts, properly speaking, from what's we called a colossal fraud through the Act of Union of 1909. That Act of Union excluded all of us, but gave the colonial powers, particularly the Union of the British and the Boers, the right over the land. And excluded almost all of us, even the 13% that we're talking about that was given to people, was based on Bantustans and tribalism. So, and they did not own the land completely. They were not given the land as their own. They were still controlled by the colonialists. So we must reverse that order. That's the argument of the piece. You must restore land to its original owners.
But Mr. Varrie Senior, I want you to come in here, please. Just help the listeners out there to understand exactly what's the view of the current government around land in South Africa as it stands right now.
Well, the current government is ruling a colonial created state with colonial created borders. When they inherited that state, they inherited a state which at the beginning only gave 7% of the land to Bantu traditional leaders, and then later something called 13%, right? Never giving land to the Khoi and Bushman people and their descendants. But I want you to understand also later on, I will speak of Khoisan because we believe that the Khoi and San descendants is intermarried and interprocreated. So we are justified to combine the two terms as Khoisan. And we don't worry whether it is a German that came and gave that name. That name is now, those names are in the Constitution. That's how the current resurgence is not a resurgence of the Griqua, or the Nama, or the Korana, or the Sen, or the Khoi. The resurgence that is outside, the revival that is becoming a revolution, is done in the name of two names that is combined as Khoisan. So, the Khoisan, how is government looking at this? This is the question. At South Africa, government, this black government, now we don't believe in race, but for convenience sake, we're going to call it black, because you're asking me to talk about the government, and the government identifies themselves as black, because white people told them they're black. So, when the land, this government, which through a negotiated settlement, not through war, which means people spoke, and they call it a bosberaad. So we don't know what they spoke to each other. But when we look at 30 years that has gone by of pretending to have the intention to address the land issue, even with the constitution and expropriation in it, no attempt has been made by government to do anything significant. So, if we want to determine how government thinks, we must look at their behavior. We must ask, it's like the Minister of Land is now new. But, for instance, someone is the Minister of Land Reform. And we had many Ministers of Land Reform. But what have they reformed? So if you want to understand, you must look at what they've done. What they call themselves, Minister of Land Reform, then you ask yourself, what have they reformed? How did they look at the word, the meaning of the word reform? Are they just stooges put there to pretend, and a few people in the ANC who are connected to people outside the ANC speak about things, and things are going to, irrespective of how the ANC sits down and talk. The year in which, just after Zuma was put out of government or had to resign, we've pushed with a lot of ANC branches. They said, listen, the branches, you're going to have an AGM, push for the land, push for the land. They went, they had a successful approach and a demand that was recognized at the AGM, land. It's 10 years, going for 10 years later. What happened? It's just pretense. They're playing a game. Now, I'm going to say this now. We're trying to see government and to define government, but all we can say is incompetence, unwilling, empty promises. And it looks like government is not, they're not stupid. They know what they're doing. The lack of action, of proper action over the last 30 years was intentional. It's not mere incompetence. Now, if we are going to investigate those people who are employed by the state and the people who gives them the job, who place them, then we understand that state capture has been real all the time. If we're going to look and they have an investigation of land that was given for, there's two principles in the Constitution, it's restitution and what's the other one?
Redistribution.
Redistribution. We're going to find out that a lot of people that are working for the state and those who employed them have had a strategy to push the land into certain elite people's hands. Now, I want to say this before, because I don't want to be too long on this.
Can we just
I just want to land.
Can we just give the chief of staff an opportunity?
I just want to land on this because I need to complete what I say. Yeah. Now, when you understand that the ANC and the laws and the agreements that they made in terms of 1913 said that about 80% of the land is going to remain in the hands of the colonizers and the beneficiaries of colonization, then it means that those who didn't care what they do with the 20%, they can rob it, they can take it for themselves, whatever. And this is the situation that we are sitting with. I want to make the last statement. 30 years, 6 terms of office. They have never consulted the Khoisan. Never made any law in favor of the Khoisan. They have rather avoided us and made laws against us. Therefore, we as Xhosa, the great Aboriginal community, says that we can no longer depend on this government and respect this government as the government, because it's a political party representative agency that goes to government, that goes there for their own intentions, abuse the vote of the people, make false promises, and then go and do their own thing. So for the Aboriginal people, no one is representing us in legislative authority. For that reason, the door is closed. No political party will make rules for us anymore. Indigenous law, I'm making this announcement today. I've given the state a letter which I delivered to the Speaker of Parliament in 2017 and to the presidency. A declaration of Aboriginal law. We have given them a letter that says you have 30 calendar days to respond. Should you not respond, then we will assume that you have no questions and that you accept it. They never responded. They went and made laws against us. But today, and the way forward, I'm glad that CONTRALESA feels that way. I'm glad, at least. Now we can talk, because they were partners of the ANC. I was waiting for the day that the eyes will open and say, but these people are playing the fool. They're taking us for a ride. They're abusing our trust. Now we have moved closer to a point where we can talk about the real issues, which is the land. And then the land is the Richtersveld case created the precedents for us to speak to anybody. To anybody. If the state don't want to talk, we will talk to anybody. And the decision that we make, with or without the state, we will take back the land.
Let's give an opportunity to the Chief of Staff this year. Thank you so much for joining us again here this morning. I'm so glad that I guess everybody is almost on the same page, that the time has come for justice to prevail here. But with the government of national unity, and I know the Ministries in the new portfolio there, what's the views from the office space?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and good morning to your viewers. Our view is, as government, it's basically that we need to urgently use the land to do two important things. One is to create wealth for our people in terms of being able to employ bias towards employing themselves. Secondly, is to reduce the inequality. Land is the most basic and the most important primary driver of production. It's the third pillar of driving the economy. When we say that the economy is stagnant, you can easily refer it back to the non-utilization of land. And the non-utilization of land, like people normally jump to, is that land reform and communal land, it's less utilized. But so is the land that sits in the coded name of commercial farmers, which actually means white. So there is unproductivity there. So there are opportunities for us to turn around the country. That's the first element. Second element, looking at the structure and the form. We must appreciate that the sources of law are basically three. One is the legislative one. Two is the common law. Three is the customary law. I think that element is underutilized in this country as far as land, because the common law paradigm and the customary law paradigm conflicts from the foundation of thought. And the case that is being mentioned really goes back to the biasness of the customary law. And the customary law has always been clear that you have a right to use. When you no longer use, you bring it back to the community for the community to decide how it's going to use it, because you don't own the land as individual. You own the land as a community for the betterment of everyone in the community. And if we accept that the constitution that exists is the true authority, then it means that customary law as well exists in parallel. The failure has been activists have not used customary law fully to maximize it. When you see cases like the cases in the case in the Northern Cape that is being raised as the precedent, it then assists in driving that agenda, and government is open to that kind of discussion. There are programs that have been laid out in government. Failures and successes can be discussed, but I can assure the community that as this government, we are willing to drive the agenda of land very aggressively. Thank you.
I just need the panel that's here. You are more than welcome to start to engage now, Varrie, and everybody around the table here. Please help me to understand, help the South Africans to understand around how this will work and how it will function. 70% in the hand of white people, big businessmen and the owners of the land through finances per se. How will this work out? And different groups, you're talking about the Khoi, the San, you're talking about Zulu, Xhosa, Pedi, you're talking about how will we find unity around the land issue? Can you unpack it most probably in a more simpler way? And what is the expectation from the Khoisan specifically if it comes to land? Of course, a person has to reckon that right from the west, right from the Northern Cape side, you see a lot of presence of Khoisan, colored people, Bushman people in that zone. But when you get more to the KwaZulu area, you find more Zulus there. And so there's pockets in the country. What happened at which point in time? And the Prince earlier was talking about the demarcation of the specifics of the land through the whites of back then in the day, pushing people in specific pockets. And then we mentioned 1910 as well with the Union, when the four pockets between Transvaal and the Free State and alike was developed. Please help me just to understand, and the listeners in a very simple way, because what you must not forget, everyone around this table, you are advanced in your discussions. You know exactly where you are. But the person that sits on the other side of watching on the multimedia platforms, they want to know, how will this play out? What do you suggest around the table this will play out? Because you cannot just go and take and rip things apart. How will it start? Anybody around the table?
Look, I think the first conversation, or let me say it like this first. How we need to, the type of conversation we need to have needs to be one that is open and honest conversation. A raw, and not being afraid to engage and say, what is the truth? What is the naked truth? What is the real truth? And I've heard now, and in fact I know that is even the stance of the PAC, and the Prince has mentioned, Zolani has mentioned that Africa for Africans. And by no means is what I'm going to say an attempt to try and separate and to cause division between what we call indigenous communities. But when we talk about Africa for Africans and we talk about Southern Africa, then I want to know which Africans. Because the truth is we need to establish the first truth is was there a first people in South Africa and Southern Africa? And that is an undeniable truth. And I believe, and I'm of the opinion, that they hold an unimpeachable right. You cannot negotiate whether they were here, whether this land is theirs, whether it was not theirs. I'm talking about the Khoisan people, the Khoisan people. Now, that is, I believe that is the premise from which we must engage. We've never had the opinion that people must be chased out of South Africa or that we are not brothers and sisters with other African communities. But we also have to understand that there is distinction even between Bantu speaking communities themselves. There's a distinction between them. But one truth is that we are all Africans and that we have to take hands because we have a common fight here. There's a common enemy which is land dispossession. I'm not going to call the enemy as white people. It's a few white people that are driving an agenda. It's a few black elite people that are driving a particular agenda. So in terms of where are we headed with this conversation or in terms of the land, is let us first establish the first truth. Whose land is this truly? And then from there, what are we going to do about it? Because we can't isolate ourselves from the rest of Africa and say, right, do whatever you're going to do. We need to understand what is the path that we're going to walk here. What kind of partnership or even a treaty are we going to form and say, right, guys, we have a common understanding. We have a common enemy, the dispossession of land, the colonial framework of apartheid, and the European frameworks. So what are we going to do moving forward? I think that is the conversation is how are we going to take hands? Does CONTRALESA or yourself even, does the PAC, does the government acknowledge that the land first belongs to the Khoisan people? That is, I think, a conversation that, or something that I want to know. What is the stance from the other African people?
Let me just come in there, Chairperson.
Just let me.
Before he responds, because I know he's going to respond, and before he responds, I want to say something.
Allow the moderator to to run the show, Honourable Larry Varrie. Well, no, I think that you are right to say that we are distinct or diverse, for that matter, because also the Khoi and San people are not homogeneous like the rest of the continent. And I don't like when we debate this, we confine it to the colonial borders, because the Khoi and San people are found in Namibia, are found in Zambia, are found in Botswana, are found in Angola, everywhere. And we as African communities, all of us, including the Khoi and San, we are related by blood. So even in the context of South Africa, I carry in my veins the Khoi blood. The language of my first instance is Xhosa, is greatly inspired by the Khoi and San people. And therefore we shouldn't trivialize this issue of the distinction and the diversiveness that we have as a continent. It's part of us being a dynamic society as Africa. Therefore, we can't make a claim that says the land belongs to a particular cultural grouping. It belongs to us as a collective. And that's where our strength lies as a people if we were to fight this thing, potently, as we should. So holding hands, we should not capitalize on the divisions that might be there culturally, but we should capitalize on the commonalities that we have as a people. From a point of view of the harsh experience that we went through when we were colonized and the land was taken away from us, brutally so, by people of foreign origin. Secondly, when you talk about the First Nations, let me address this thing of the First Nation. we as the African community, in our different cultural ramifications, we are the first people of Africa. Everybody who came from outside of Africa, those are the secondary people. So the concept of the First Nation, for instance, as it is applied in America, it refers to the first people of that area. And when the Europeans came in, they then came in to brutalize them, to terrorize them, and hence now they are defined because that's their area of origin. So as is the case with us in Africa. This is our landscape and the landmass of our origin. We don't come from outside. None of the African communities are coming from another continent. We belong to this continent. So there has been a great sense of wanting to overemphasize that the issue of First Nation only applies. No, I think that we are making a comparison which is unfair, which is also mislocated, so to say. So I would say that I am in agreement with you. The land belongs to us as a collective of these communities of Africa that are related by experience, that are related by spirit, that are related by blood, that are related by a future that they must define as to what do they want in the final analysis, which I think all of us want restoration. We want a continent that is thriving. He's speaking about economic liberation. The first issue that we have to deal with is to restore our land, and then we deal with the issue of economic liberation, because if we don't have the land, we will never access the wealth. It's ill-informed to think that you can access the wealth when the land doesn't belong to you. You will always be beaten on the table because the game is on the ownership of the means and the factors of productions. If they are not with you, forget. And when we say we want the land back, we are also hitting the button of factors and the means of production. Thank you.
I was just wondering if Varrie Jr., are you okay with the answer, because you are pushing for the First Nation who was first in South Africa, and the issue of the Prince is we're all Africans, and it doesn't matter where you're from, but we're from the continent. What's your take? Is that answer satisfactory?
Look,
Yeah.
I think
I wanted to give a different perspective before you even respond, because you put the issue on.
I'd like us to also
Yes.
to all just engage on that. So we,
Yeah. Look, while I think Prince Mkiva is putting it more clear in modern terms as the end goal, but I wanted to give a perspective of the history and the damage done to a people, and also make comparisons with other countries. You know, our sole aim should be to unite people and make us all feel we have a sense of belonging. But coloniality, or the colonial system, for instance, used the differences of people, particularly the ethnic differences of people, as a tool to drive a wedge among peoples themselves. And they use that for selfish colonial ends. If you look at what they call COLOUREDS in the legal systems, they use that to break leadership and an opinion that comes from that community they call coloured. And they spread it and even divided that coloured concept to mean so many things. And we all know that they also use slavery. They brought in people from other lands in the Western Cape to use them. That history, I think, is very clear to us. The point I'm trying to raise here is that what has been missing is for us to address the issue of leadership of that community. That community's leadership has been so brainwashed over the years, and this is one aspect, that they accepted to be used as a buffer and a weapon that can be used against other people, because they were the racist aspect meant that they were, and I'm using this term in inverted commas, they were like amper bars. Now, if you do that, if you do that, you have misled a lot of people. So there's an aspect of mental liberation and emancipation from that is coming out in recent, in modern times, where the people are now identifying themselves not as colored, but as Khoisan, as indigenous people, as Aborigines, even as First Nation, as Larry says. But I see that as the growth and development of a people who want to come out and be heard. Remember that in 1983, legally speaking, when they did that tricameral parliament, it was to try and use puppets and destroy the whole concept of an identity of a people and use that to divide people. But it hasn't been solely addressed and dealt with properly. And I think that if we allow the community of so-called coloreds to come up and make their argument and clear, and we understand it all, it will lead us as a first step to unity. The first step to unity is to be truthful to ourselves and to identify that truth. The same applies to all other people. That's why I say even Prince Comrade Mkiva is saying that we have intermarried over the years. It's true. We are related to each other. If you go to these neighboring countries like Namibia, Botswana, and other, there's a strong history of resistance. I'm not saying the brainwashed leadership is the only one. There's a strong history of resistance by people like Wetboy and others who took up arms and tried to defend themselves. Even the political arguments we're making now have been made before. You know, one of the first political organizations is the African People's Organization by Abdullah, I forgot the name now, my tongue. But that organization was made by people who are called coloreds, yeah? But they call themselves African. So we do have a positive history that we can use to further unite a diverse people into one, so that we minimize unnecessary conflict, but focus on the unity that we need to push.
I think before I give Mr. Varrie Senior opportunity, I think one of the issues that the government must fix for now, as I hear around the table, is to see the so-called colored, and I'm using that deliberately because it was bestowed upon us. But if you consider that as a point, then it is important for government to declare the colored as African. And that's per se, that's the first point, and I think that is what this conversation is all about. And I think that's why Varrie Jr. pushed it so hard on the fact that they the First Nation, but there's not even a acceptance of the current government to be called African, because all of us are from Africa, and African doesn't mean black in particular, but it means African, you're from the soil. I think that's one of the first places and first things that needs to be done in order to feel inclusive, even in conversation, for whatever it is.
Yes. Yeah, I listening to what Mr. Seroke said now, and what the Princess said, and of course what Mr. Varrie said. Look, I get the feeling, as we are sitting here, we are already kind of negotiating. And I think when government looks at what is happening here, is what they would have liked to prevent, that the affected people will start speaking to each other. Right? The word Jaki used now, Mr. Seroke used now, is the buffer community. It was strategically planned that by the colonial governments, that our community must be the buffer community in the center of apartheid for degrees of discrimination. But it was never good for us. It was just fiction. So part of the resurgence where colored people, so-called or classified colored people, are identifying themselves as the Khoisan, means that every time a colored, one more colored, calls himself a Khoisan, he is re-Africanizing himself. And is decolorizing himself or decolonializing himself. because that term was never used before colonization. It was an imposed identity. It was done with the worst intentions. In fact, what colored people should know is that the colored identity is a cultural genocide weapon. It is meant to erode your memory, and it is a successful psychological warfare program to decolonize the First Nation, the owner of the land, and turn him into something else, displace him in his mind. As a man thinketh, so is he. When you look at colored people, that psychological warfare program has been successful. So sometimes, even if we want to fight with colored people, our own families, and we understand that we've been there, and we understand the difficult things that we had to overcome, the thoughts in our own minds, because it's a fight, it's an internal fight, to displace yourself from who you are. Now, I was 10 years old when my grandmother told me, my son, I'm so sorry, your mother and father will never tell you. But she she was at our house, I was doing homework. And then it was a history homework. And she said to me, you see that, they call themselves voortrekkers. You see the ox wagon. Do you see the guns? We had all those things. We also moved out of the Cape to escape British annexation. There's a lot of commonality, but they'll never tell you, but they tell you you're a colored. We're not. And she showed me her ID. She's not. Now, colored identity was constructed out of 9 codes, 01 to 09. Cape colored, colored. Malay, Malay colored, other colored. And then they had the Aboriginal titles. But those who are Cape coloreds are now where the white man made children with the Khoi people. And then the Malay people with the Aboriginal people. So it's a Malay, some Malays remained Malay and they didn't mix. But because of the ideology and the psychological warfare program, they integrated all of us by forced integration into one identity, and then even went further in 1951 and wrote that into law in terms of the race laws, which was in 1975, 1976, the apartheid system was declared a crime against humanity. So what you must understand is that the term colored is part of that crime against humanity. But it's going to be a long process for our people to understand that, right? So I want to say this. You see, we cannot, the prince is stating what he believes. He's stating his convictions. That's how he thinks. That is how he sees things. In the same way, we speak from our convictions, the way we understand things. For us, we have been divided for long. We haven't spoken to each other. We've been prejudiced against each other, one way or the other. The last 30 years has now forced us to come directly to each other. To say, bro, let's not act like we don't have a problem here. Right? That is where we are now. But the issue of First Nation doesn't mean we're better. It's like the king of the Zulu, the family, they say they are better Zulus than the others. They're not better. It's just the position. Their blood is the same blood
Yeah.
Of the Zulu people. I just want, let me just land.
Mr. Varrie, we just have to wrap up the program. We're about to run out of time.
How
And I
much time
just,
is left?
I just want to give everybody a fair opportunity just to share. Most probably just closing remarks from this point. And let us say this. This is the beginning of many conversations. I must just admit, around this table, it's the first time that from my perspective, I could hear views from the other side of the table as well. And a beautiful approach about all of us are in Africa. We are from Africa. And how are we going to join hands to let this work futuristically? But one of the first things, and that's what I gather, is that specifically the colored people need to be re-identified as Africans in this country. Because if you're not an African, they don't see you within the same advantages. And due respect to everybody that's around the table, we must admit that they are marginalized in many ways. From the workplace to, it doesn't matter where it is, they are marginalized. And I think that's the first fight, is to make sure that on the books you are seen as African in particular. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna give, okay, you go ahead.
I should first have been quiet for a while.
Yeah.
You asked the question, where to from now? The minister is currently sponsoring a bill that will be in cabinet and out for public comment, which is the Equitable Access to Land Bill. It changes the paradigm from the early 90s laws that were more biased towards a restitution era, that were more biased to you proving that you have a title, not the colonizer proving that why he has a title, but the person who has to be restituted was that. So we're moving into the redistribution mode that talks to how do we limit the amount of land that is held by those who are holding the land. How do we maximize access for people who need the land for use? And that conversation will really assist all of us to participate in the delivery of that bill. We need to change we need to use the 30 years lessons of why land reform has been so slow to advance and make land, because currently land is not accessible to government for government to distribute, and we have to change that environment. And the minister has taken this opportunity to present that different orientation and a different paradigm that we are looking at. I'm looking forward to further conversation on how that shapes up. Thank you.
It's very interesting, though, that you can't redistribute what you don't have. The first thing is to take the land back.
The bill deals with those issues.
Yeah, look, I wanted to also understand from what I mentioned in the beginning on whether we should opt to go with state-led reform, whether we should opt to go with state-led reform, if that is going to benefit the people, or whether we should have direct negotiations between affected parties, affected communities. Now, I've also watched certain things regarding everyone is at the table today, and I know that is something that we are currently, we have to look at that. If there's nothing coming from the state, if the state has had 30 years to do something, there's now a new administration when it comes to land, and we need to put both options on the table and see, right, 30 years has passed. What are we gonna get, from the state? Can we know that this is a PAC-led ministry also that advocates for land? Mm-hmm. That's main fight all along was land. And now it is, for me, I'm already leaning towards the fact that why would the president, knowing the PAC stance with land, put them in the Ministry of Land? And the PAC, like I said, has always advocated for land, for Africa, for Africans. Now they have the Ministry of Land. What are we going to see when it comes to land? Then the other question is, if we are not going to see, if the PAC, who is leading the Ministry of land is blocked for whatever reason from doing what they have proclaimed to stand for all the years. And nothing comes from it. What is it then going to look like between the affected parties? Is the traditional community, are they open to negotiation with other communities, or are we going to wait on the state to do something that they might never do? So I'm also trying to understand whether the other communities are open to that. Is it based on some podcasts that I've watched of you? You said, well, CONTRALESA is fed up with this government. They had 30 years to do something about land and they've done nothing. What are we looking at? That's what I want to know. So, between all parties, even the Afrikaner community I mentioned in the beginning, every party that is affected by land. So I think, like you've rightfully mentioned, Jaki, also, is, unless we can have an honest, truthful conversation, we're never going to get real results at the end of the day. So, yeah, I don't know what the stance is from the traditional community on that.
Yeah, well, for me, I want to start about what Mr. Klaber talks about, the equitable access to land bill. When it comes to the land administration in the country, we just have many pieces of legislation, which I think is confusing the issue of the restoration of the land. The more you put in a new legislation, you are confusing it further. The multi-tenure system, where the land is owned in different ways and different methods, is meant to keep the hand firmly in the hands of our erstwhile colonizers. So when you add legislation on top of another, you are delaying and extending the day of the restoration of the land. It is for the reason that we are saying we are now approaching the President, the Speaker of Parliament, the Chief Justice to call for a referendum on the land issue. Because it is unfair to call this country our country, and yet 80% of the land belongs to people of European origin. How can we allow it as if we were idiots, as the natives of this country? If we were to call this country really ours, and the owners and the custodians of the land, then let the land be taken back to its original owners. We know that the land was taken against our people. There was a genocide committed against our people. The wars of dispossession and the wars of resistance were about the land question. So for us, we think that the referendum is a solution. No more issues of the bills. We have just passed an expropriation bill, which is meant to give access. And now you are mentioning that you are coming up with an equitable access to land bill. For me, that is problematic. But I must say that the fact that the President, not just any ordinary PAC leader, the President of the PAC is the leader of this ministry. We have got confidence in him, and we want to give him all the support. But we think that he needs to take a different view from what has been happening in the last 30 years, so that we can see the revolutionarization of the land question in the country. And that means to us the restoration of the land. And we're not saying by restoration of the land is that we're going to squeeze out people of origin, European origin. Everybody will have access, but the land of Africa must literally, in letter and spirit, belong to the Africans. Of course, everybody must have access to land in the final analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. No, look, I certainly think that a conversation of this nature is very important, and it should be extended. We should hold this conversation as part of our consultation with each other in order to arrive at solutions of the problems we are facing. On the issue of land, I think land is an asset that the people have. And if we say we are an African people and we've concluded that as an inclusive people who call themselves African within the the confines of Southern Africa, we should also understand the territorial rights that indigenous people have as part of international law. Because the Constitution as it stands demands that when you want access or to restore land, you have to go through legal processes and understand how the laws were made by the founding fathers of South Africa post 1994. But we should, and I'm saying this also from a PAC point of view, we should consult with the broader public and come to an agreement of a common understanding via a plebiscite or a referendum, as has been suggested, to say who has the right to land, because our land is occupied by foreigners. There are foreign owners of the land who are not even here. They just keep the land, and that land is lying fallow. All these issues have not been properly agreed upon, but I definitely think that in order for us to deal with the issue of inequality and extreme poverty among our people, we have to address the issue of land. Thank you.
Can we also just, in closing, talk about AgriForum?
Can I just, because you started now, everybody had now third time, but only the two of us sit in but I don't know, is it another conversation? But first, let me ask, how much time is left?
Well, the best thing to do a podcast is to stick it within an hour, because viewership just have that amount of time of concentration. So when we come back here, we should get on something in a specific, like a result-driven or something that, any form of suggestions for the way forward.
Well, but I just wanted to end the conversation that we had now, my part, so that we drive to an end. Now, what I want to say is, my seat went down now. I didn't get short for the viewers' sake. Right. I hear what the government is saying, but our position as the First Nation, the Aboriginal people of this land, is that this is our land, and we will not back down on it. But we need alliances. We are not dumb. We need strong, formidable alliance that will take us out over the winning line. So, and whoever we will form an alliance with must understand that we don't trust government. They're 30 years. Now, we have a PAC leader in leading land, but he is still tied to bureaucracy and red tape of parliament and all the procedures. Government knows how to waste time. Justice delayed is justice denied. We have been denied justice for 30 years. The traditional leaders at least had stipends from government to keep them, to control them and to keep them in check. We have been totally isolated, and the very same, let me just say this for us to latch on later on. You see, traditional leaders has never spoken for us while they saw how government oppressed us. The traditional leadership, the National House of the Traditional Leaders Bill was passed as early as 1996. Accommodation was made for black traditional leaders. And they were dilly-dallying with us. It's 30 years later, we don't have a deal. Justice delayed is justice denied. There is no other way we can look at this. The government of the day has denied the Khoisan people justice, and for 30 years, the traditional community has been quiet. But we're happy. We're happy that they're unhappy, because now they understand how we feel. And now we have, I was on the national executive of CONTRALESA already. We met, we did engage in certain issues. But I don't think we were ready as Khoi people and traditional people. So I want to say, just land with this, we don't trust government.
Yeah.
We will look at other avenues.
No, but I think I need to correct what Larry is saying. It's unfair. He knows that CONTRALESA has been in the forefront of the struggle raising the plight of the Khoi and San communities in the country. And in each and every leadership collective of CONTRALESA in the National Executive Committee, we always ensured that there's representation of the Khoi and San people. The current National Khoisan Council came about because of our struggles on the ground as CONTRALESA. Even the current commission that is in place now came about because of our struggles. We have been taking...
But that's the point I'm trying to make.
No, but don't say we've been quiet.
No, but...
We've been very vocal.
No, but listen to what I'm saying.
About the discrimination against the Khoi and San cultural
but
community.
It was not...
And I have been in leadership of CONTRALESA for more than 20 years. As long as I have been in leadership, it has been, you can go to all the resolutions, including the Kimberley resolution of 2010, which you mentioned the other day. In 1999, when we came about with this establishment of the Khoi and San Council, it is something that we pushed for. So we have been in the forefront. We have never negated the Khoi and San communities. I personally, when I was deployed as an advisor to the Minister of CODESA, made it a point that in 2008, for the first time, we forced the representation of the Khoi and San people in the Northern Cape, for instance. And we said this needs to be extended to other provinces. Of course, we are fighting against a tendency which is opposed to this. But we as CONTRALESA were quite very clear in terms of our stand in fighting for your rights as a people.
Okay, but let me just say this, because I have to just answer to that. Give me a chance.
I'm just glad that we are at this point now where we can talk. And this is the point of departure. It's also true that the so-called colored people were not in unity. And now that they are oppressed, and I tell you, they feel the oppression more than ever, you'll hear a voice. So it's also good for the colored people to stand together in unity and let their voice be heard. And for many, many years, I think we are now at that point. A little late, but we are at that point where we can now stand together and have a voice. But allow me just in closing of this, because it seems like we're going to have...
But there's something that I have to say, what I said, and it will take me 1 minute to say.
30 seconds, 30 seconds.
Right. I just want to say, I hear what you're saying. There was efforts from CONTRALESA, but it doesn't mean what CONTRALESA said and did is in agreement with the broader Khoisan community. Especially you mentioned the NKSC. The National Khoisan Council does not represent the majority. Next time, I will show you the constitution of the National Khoisan Council, that it is a state puppet. And the NKC was created by the state to be a puppet, right? The other thing is, we don't agree with the TKLA because it recolonizes us. Now, I know between CONTRALESA and the NKSC, they have agreed with government. They did not oppose it. But we oppose the TKLA because government, that bill says the premiers and ministers will govern the Khoisan. We are self-determined. We reject it with the content it deserves. That's why we say we can't trust government in the land negotiations. Government will have to come to us. We went for 30 years after them trying to talk about land. We will open up conversation with the rest because we have rights.
The minute is up. Before you run, I just want to know, gentlemen, around this table, I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's really healthy. It's needed. Overdue, more than. I just want to know, based on the land issue, if you consider just the other day, on the very first moment when this thing between Donald Trump in South Africa happened with Aki Forum, that whole issue around the land. On the first day, the president mentioned that he doesn't care. Donald Trump must run his country, he will run this country. On a second interview, the whole situation changed. He was more softer around the whole situation. I just want to know, this discussion, is it futile? Where will this lead us? Because with the sanctions that America will push on South Africa, it seems like we buckle under that pressure severely. So What's the outcome? And it seems like AgriForum at this point in time had a big voice, a huge voice in this country. Even now, the other day, standing up for this child that was raped just the other day. I mean, they stick their neck out that far. It's almost as if they have the confidence that America is on their side. What will happen economically? What can this team tell us around that?
The first thing, I don't know how much time we have, that I just wanted to address and then come to that, is we opened the conversation on a landmark case, the Richtersveld case. And I don't think the government, or the chief of staff representing the ministry, representing the government, maybe I didn't get it, as mentioned how that precedence that was set regarding land will be implemented in how the government runs the ministry concerning the land. I would like to know that as a primary thing of this discussion. How, considering that Aboriginal title exists in South Africa, is confirmed by the Constitutional Code, how that ministry or the government will implement that in how they approach land reform and rural development.
As constitutional precedents.
As constitutional precedents. And then we've had, let me not even say it like that. When it comes to, we understand, in fact, I've had a conversation with Cecil Lafleur, who is the chairperson of the NKC, and he mentioned to me how some of the things with him going to Geneva, advocating for the indigenous rights, the rights of the Khoisan people, and what Mandela's stance was when it came to the Khoisan people, Nelson Mandela's stance when it came to the Khoisan people, that Mandela outright told him that the Khoisan don't have land, and therefore we can't do much for them in South Africa. But I don't know if the Richtersveld case started in Mandela's administration or if it started in Mbeki's.
No, 2003. No, it started earlier.
Or whether it was in Mbeki's administration. But it was appealed by the government. African people, an African-led government, appealed Aboriginal title. So I need to know, I want to know, I would like to know the government's view when it comes to that legal precedent that was set by the highest, by the supreme law. You can't review a constitutional decision. You can't appeal a constitutional decision. It is part of the law. So when it comes to Mandela's project, does the government, the seventh, I think it's the seventh administration, there's the Mandela project failed. In terms of addressing the biggest issue, which is land. It is the biggest issue for the black community as well. I'm saying black for ease of reference. But I would like to know that is the land is the biggest issue. It's the unaddressed issue. I don't know what your stance is with regards to what I've mentioned from a governmental perspective.
Thank you very much. That's a very direct question.
Yeah.
And I will give a direct answer. The precedents of courts in this country are binding to everyone, including the government. Therefore, the government is bounded by that court decision. How we interpret it, because the precedents as it stands now, it can be utilized by lawyers going to court to get a similar judgment. But to make it effective in the state holistically, it's this part that the prince is running away of then inculcating it into some legislation. And in this legislation that we're working on, those principles that come from various restitution cases, various redistribution cases that have brought precedents, are brought into daily application. That's a reason why we're updating the legislation from a different paradigm. I cannot talk on the Mandela project and the Mandela paradigm, but I can talk on the minister's view that is driving an agenda that will be revolutionary from how people access land going forward and how people keep land. Because originally, this was supposed to be a distribution bill, but we saw that you first have to deal with the whole value chain to give access. And also, just to touch the issue of trust of the state, also this bill, as we are putting it on the table, we are also putting it in the way that it will allow non-state actors to be able to utilize this law to enable and facilitate better access to land by all other means that are necessary, not limited to the state,
There's
although
something that is
the
not
custodianship will
understood
still stay to
here
the state.
in what we have said and what we are trying to say. Government, in terms of that precedent that was set, Aboriginal law is part of the amalgam of South African law. For government to make laws, they must consult court precedents. He said it now, right? But that does not mean that government can go now and have their meetings with the state actors, and then they decide and come with a law. No! Aboriginal law entitles us to say to the government, come talk to us. We have a law. Our law is as much law as the law of government. That is what we want the Ministry of Land to understand. And this is where we want CONTRALESA and the traditional leaders to come in with us and say, let's use this.
Yeah, Larry.
Yes, well, give me a chance. Let's use this together. Government has been playing us all the time, right? So now we say, let's form an understanding amongst each other, right? And then we address the issue of land based on that constitutional court precedents. You want access to the land. I want access to the land. There is the gap. Constitutional precedents says Aboriginal title is as much law. Government cannot make law against it.
No, I was going to say that this is the verdict of the court, and it doesn't translate really to legislation. It becomes a case study to make reference to. So let us not romanticize it and think that once it happened in that community, it flies across. That's how government works. It will happen only in a piecemeal fashion. Whenever there's another claim of that sort, there is already a precedent, and then it will be used in that context.
We differ with that position.
So my issue, no, I don't have a problem that you differ, but the issue is that we need an overarching legislation in the country on the land question to solve our problem.
Which you want the government to make, and which they failed for 30 years. I am saying to you, let us sit together, use the precedents that the court has given us, let us have meetings, and we take government on. We can't wait for red tape.
There are times when you say you recognize the Constitution, and there are times that you say...
No, government is not the Constitution.
Yeah, no, I'm saying you are making reference to the Constitutional Court. For me, I think the sovereignty of the people is even above the Constitution. When we are calling about the referendum, we are stating a point that time has come for us to take the power back to our hands. Our power does not belong to the judges. Our power does not belong to the politicians. The power belongs to the people. When people have mandated people to do something over a period of time and they have failed to do it, we as the people, we have a right now to take the power into our hands and say, this is what we are going to, this is what we want to see happening going forward.
Yeah, then if we are going to go for a referendum, then we are going to have to discuss it as
Dr. Hendricks, you ask a question.
Yeah,
I'm anxious to answer it.
I just want to get there because you know what? I really respect everybody around this table. I'm enjoying it thoroughly, everyone's view. But at the end of the day, will this conversation not just stop here? Because in the broader light of stuff, if you look at tariff wars that Donald Trump is running right now worldwide, and he's manipulating the world. As a matter of fact, to such an extent that he's telling them that he's going to take Greenland, for that matter. He sent our ambassador back home. He doesn't care. He just do what he wanted to do. And it seems like South Africa is softened around that. So if you consider our discussion around the table, what effort will that, what change will that make?
I was going to put it in a different context, but I want to answer your question directly. However, here's the context. You know, there's been the rise on an international level of, let's call it reactionary internationalism, what is called the alternative right, alt-right, a position being held by various parties who are defined as right-wing, from France to Italy and many other countries, including the US. So this phenomenon has grown so much, and you are right to say it is represented by the president of Donald Trump. But my point would be to answer the participation of AfriForum in that scheme of things. And I think they're crossing the line, the AfriForum. And I would have been more attuned to AfriForum as a social movement addressing concerns of communities, like you are rightfully saying, fighting in the courts and things like that. But once they get into the political arena, then they become a pawn in an international war they don't understand. And they will mess up the name of the Afrikaners. And many Afrikaners have Khoisan blood. They are part and parcel of the land in Southern Africa. They have no other home except here. And we have extended a hand, a conciliatory hand of embracing them. And I think the AfriForum are unwittingly turning a good attitude towards the people into a very negative one, because they seem to be going back to apartheid rule and apartheid tendencies where they are better than the rest of us. And I think the leaders of AfriForum must be very careful not to be manipulated like pawns by the international alternative right. We need to have progressive ideas. We need to unite our people. They must be part of that unity and part of the future. The economic issues and aspect you are referring to are like a double-sided sword. I mean, America's own empire is destined to fall. I mean, there are other powers in the world that are emerging. And the geopolitical space of Southern Africa belongs to us. We want to develop our economy. That's why we're talking land today, so that we can become a very good player on an international level and have good trade practices with other parts of the world, including America. But this trend led by Donald Trump, I'm afraid, is very dangerous and would not benefit us.
Yeah, thank you so much. We need to close now. But really now, this is not 30 seconds, it's a goodbye from everybody. And then we'll kick out of this program. Thank you so much. Let's start at the corner there.
Yeah, I think this was a good start. I was actually prepared for Zolani. Now, by watching the video last night, I saw he was ready in that conversation and talking about the traditional leaders being fed up. I said, okay, then time has brought us together. I want to say that I think the last time when I was a member of the National Executive, it was a good point of making contact. We know some things about each other. They normally, sometimes they said, Larry, we don't always like for what you stand, but when you're not here, then the meetings are boring. But I think this sounds like a negotiation process.
Thank you very much for the invite. Let me state categorically that the minister, in particularly, and government is ready to work, is ready to be part of this engagement of shaping how the land is accessed by all our people who need it, particularly the African people that have been defined here. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I noticed that you only invited men here. I think it's important to have a women's voice in order to diffuse some perceptions that the land ownership and the land administration is only under the stewardship of men. It's untrue in an African society. Women have full access to land and they have got tenure security. Actually, as a matter of priority, tenure security is always given to women. And secondly, we are raising this issue of the AfriForum. It would have been great if we would have had them around the table so that through logic we can convince each other on how to behave in the best interest of the nation and in the best interest of the public.
I want you to have closing remarks, okay?
Yes, my view would be that this discussion is a good example of how we can hold a national dialogue and deal with difficult issues. It is important for people to talk, express themselves contextually, and make their voice heard for the benefit of us all. So in the concept of the GNU, they also have highlighted the importance of a national dialogue. And I think that national dialogue is an important carry-through of building unity among the people and building a sovereign, powerful nation that knows where it is headed to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Varrie Jr., closing remarks from your side, and then we'll be out.
Well, first of all, I would also like to thank everybody for being here. I think it's important, the views that are presented here today are very important views to understand where government stance is. I've mentioned earlier regarding the Richtersveld case, and I'm not really, I'll be honest, I feel like it was played down. The fact that it was a precedent that was set, it becomes part of law, meaning you can't ignore it. And I do want to know, is it going to be part of government's approach when it comes to dealing with the land, especially with the Land Expropriation Act? How can government expropriate land that doesn't belong to them? They then inherited the land from white people. They're running the same land that was given to them. So, but ultimately, we want to move forward. We want to understand who is it that we can take hands with? Who can we join hands with walking forward? You understand? Who are the opponents and who are the allies in this conversation? I am personally happy that the PAC is running the Ministry of Land. I am expecting change to come. And I think people, the country as a whole, should expect change to come, because this is an organization, a movement that is championing Africa for Africans. I mean, it's a powerful statement, but what is it going to mean in the long run? With CONTRALESA also, with the Prince of the Xhosa people, I think it is also important for us to understand where we stand. And you've put it on the table. You said, listen, we are brothers. Let us not view each other as different people in the sense that we are not Africans together. I believe moving forward, yes, we must take hands. Otherwise, where there's division, we ultimately will end up failing. So I am happy that though there are certain things that we disagree on, like one thing that I strongly stand on the fact that we are the First Nation, the Khoisan people. But that does not by any means or in any way mean that we are pushing people aside and saying, we don't care about anyone, this is our land. We want to share the land, but on our terms. On our terms. And land is one of the things that we refuse to, let it be a point of, we leave it in the hands of somebody else to aside. You can't expropriate land without consulting the landowners, the Aboriginal title holders. And that is, I think, an important place to, converse on when it comes to, number one, expropriating land, creating bills regarding the land. Understand the precedent that was, the Constitutional Court precedent that was set.
Yes.
And then draft bills and for Parliament pass laws based on what the Constitutional Court has done. Because Parliament generally enacts laws that are unconstitutional, that AfriForum generally just takes to court and then they get set aside, or even other communities. So, I think that is important. I do, one of the questions that I posed to you also, Zolani, was in whether there will be whether we're going to allow state-led reform. You've mentioned that referendum is a decision that was, an avenue or journey that is being pursued by CONTRALESA. But as the Aboriginal people being consulted in terms of your approach, if we are saying we are brothers and this land is all of ours, if CONTRALESA is deciding that, listen, we're going to have a referendum for land, in your opinion, I would have liked to know, are we doing this collectively, as you rightfully say, Africa for Africans, or are we doing this as, this is our view and this is what we want to pursue? As a congress of traditional leaders. But, in closing, I believe the only way we can win is if we take hands. How we will take hands is another question, is a question for another day, but hands to be enjoined is definitely the route that we must pursue.
And on that note, we need to say goodbye from the Inside Show. Thank you so much, everybody. What a wonderful, wonderful session here today on this panel. Beautiful men here. And next time we'll have some ladies on the set as well. From us to you, take care. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Imagine if you have your vision as the car with the right team. Imagine how quick that vision will come into the footsteps. Something that was taking 5 years takes 3 months.
This morning is all about leadership and influence.